All right. So first thing of tonight is we have Dr. Martha Nathan here to present the history of the Greensboro Massacre, what went on that day and the events preceding that, and all related to a discussion on collaboration between the police and far-right groups within North Carolina specifically, but also as a general phenomenon. So, Marty, if you'd like to go ahead.
Are you going to play that short videotape?
Yes. Yes. Hugo, you have the link I sent you, right?
If you want, I can get started just talking, if that would be better. And then as soon as you have the share screen up, then we can go ahead with the video.
Sounds good. We can do that.
Okay. I'm going to tell you who I am right now. I'm Marty Nathan, who is a mother of 3 kids, grandparent of 2 kids. I'm a retired physician. I live in Northampton, Massachusetts. I have worked for the last 25 years as a physician in underserved urban clinics in Western Massachusetts. I do mainly, I'm still very politically active, but I do mainly climate justice work and also support of immigrant rights and providing immigrants, undocumented immigrants, with health care, which they cannot otherwise get. But I also have never given up my obsession with white supremacism, white supremacy and the development of fascism and the struggle against racism. I worked for many years as head of the Greensboro Justice Fund, which was the foundation that came out of the proceeds from the civil rights suit. And we funded groups all across the South who were fighting against racism, economic injustice, and right-wing violence. And that was incredibly, it made a whole lot of difference when it came to looking at the results of the Greensboro Massacre, which were a horrible loss, but we were able to turn some of the proceeds back and support the community that had supported us and helped us make it through those trials and the terrible pain that we suffered on November 3rd, 1979. Who was I on November 3rd, 1979? I was 28 years old. I had a 6-month-old daughter. I had been an intern in internal medicine. I had left it like several of the other people who were then killed on November 3rd, because I really felt that the system was so corrupt, so violent, and so unjust that people's health was to a great extent being harmed by the system itself. And so I went to work in a factory on the south side of Durham, and just as Jim and Bill went to, and Sandy were working in the textile mills in and around Greensboro, I was working in cabletronics, soldering little wires to little plastic things for hours on end, in the hopes of organizing workers into a union and into a revolutionary union, because I was working with the CWP at the time. As I said, I had a 6-month-old child. I was married to Mike, who was a pediatrician at Lincoln Community Health Center. He was head of pediatrics there. He loved his work, and he was a great pediatrician. My friends included Cesar Cauce, who worked at Duke University and worked very hard, fought very hard for a hospital union there. And supported the other 2 unions that were on Duke campus, and also did outreach to people all around the state. Poultry Workers Union went on strike in that same summer, and also, I guess that was in summer of '78, and there was a garbage workers strike out east in Rocky Mount. Cesar was a great union support person. and was tied to all these low-wage workers who were fighting for their lives, literally, in North Carolina. In Greensboro, we had Bill Sampson, Sandy Smith, and Jim Waller, among many other people. But they were organizing textile unions and leading. Can you hear me, guys? My husband just handed me something that says my volume is very low.
Can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, it's all good.
We can hear you. If you can't, or stand up and wave, whatever works. Okay.
We can hear you.
Anyway, they were in the midst of this incredible fight for workers' rights in the textile mills, which were even though they were some of the better paying working class jobs in the area, they were hot, filthy, dangerous, and workers were completely without rights, whether they had a union in their mill or not. Sandy worked and organized an organizing committee in the Revolution Mill, which is a cone mill that no longer exists in Greensboro. And Bill became president of his union at White Oak. And Jim worked at the Granite Mill and became president of his union as well. Jim led a strike, and Signe, I know we'll get into this later because it was very dramatic. There had been no strikes in textiles for a monkey's age. And this was a wildcat because the International refused to support them, but it was due to health and safety and also holiday time. It's the basics that workers need. Jim had been a doctor. He was a pediatrician like Mike. He left medicine. Bill was in medical school when he left to become a textile worker. And Sandy had been president of the student body at Bennett College. And was a leader. She was African-American woman. She had been a leader of the Black liberation struggle in Greensboro as a student. They were all working with a couple, among other folks, named Nelson Johnson and Joyce Johnson, who still, I wish they were here tonight. They could really represent all this much better than I. But they had been working for years in the Black community in Greensboro for both starting out as students for cultural rights for students and going on into supporting blind workers, forming a union, and several other labor struggles, and were known as the radical leadership of the Black community in Greensboro. And so these were not people to sneeze at. These were people that were working very hard for a just society, that were anti-racist. It was an amazing combination of people. It was back then there were very few Latinos in North Carolina, and so mainly we were Black and white together, but that was very unusual at the time. We were not that far away from Jim Crow, and to build that kind of interracial, multiracial unity was a very rare event. And it stuck, and it has stuck for 40 years. And I think that's one of the reasons why we were seen as so potentially dangerous. Also, our focus and our success within the mills. I mean, like I said, to lead a strike, to become presidents of unions, to form organizing committees, that is not easy stuff. And it takes a whole lot of skill and dedication. And in 78, as I said, it was a very unusual time. There was a strike wave across North Carolina that I think got the attention of the corporations and the mill owners. And the attention went in part to these people who were organizing in the mills. Let's see. At I don't know how much you know about the history of the Ku Klux Klan in the South or any part of the United States, but the Ku Klux Klan is not only an organization to murder Black people and Jews and Catholics and Latinos, and it also has been focused in the past repeatedly on labor organizing. I say focus because I mean, there's no doubt in my mind or anybody else's mind that the focusing has come from the corporate owners of the mills and factories that moved south, particularly after the Second World War, but also were there earlier. And so a history of the Ku Klux Klan attacking labor is pretty long and devastating. And there was the strike wave in 78, and then in 79 we started seeing, and we don't know for sure that that's why, but in 79 we started seeing the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. And one of the first things that we saw was an organizing attempt in this little town outside of Kannapolis called China Grove, where the Klan was going to show the film Birth of a Nation. Everybody know about Birth of a Nation? Racist to the core, and it's the Klan's favorite film. And it was also Woodrow Wilson's favorite film. And so we both heard about, when I say we, I mean the Workers Viewpoint Organization, which was the organization that bound us all together, heard about this Klan organizing event, and were asked by the community to come down and help the Black community in China Grove, to come down and help them organize against it. And that happened, and it ended up that the community plus the members of Workers Viewpoint Organization stopped the showing of Birth of a Nation. And it was humiliating for the Ku Klux Klan. There's no doubt about that. No violence occurred because there was one cop on the porch between the Klan and the hundreds of demonstrators who had been organized and were marching on the building. That there were other events that the Workers Viewpoint responded to, but mainly just kept on doing the organizing in the mills. And little did we know that in September, the Klan and the Nazis got together for something called a United Racist Front, which unfortunately is pretty historic. The Klan hate the Nazis because the Klan thinks of themselves as very patriotic. And that at that time, we weren't that far away from World War II. Here you have Nazis, Nazis working for Hitler. And so the two had never mixed, even though ideologies were parallel and completely in sync. But they came together in something called the United Racist Front in Lewisburg, North Carolina. I want to point to that because that is really where we begin to see the involvement of officials. It turns out that after China Grove, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, for some reason, had sent their agent, Bernard Butkovich, down to Winston-Salem to investigate the Nazis. And it just so happens that Butkovich, this full-time paid agent, was there at the coming together of the Ku Klux Klan and Nazis. And he overheard all their plans. And what were their plans? They were how to confront these communists and the community and the communities that were opposed to the Ku Klux Klan and who had humiliated them in China Grove. He was there. He supposedly was tape recording things, but suddenly, after it was over, those tapes somehow disappeared. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Let the people say amen. And Then in, hold on just a second. Oh, we know that Butkovich reported everything that he did to his superiors, and there was communication with the FBI and the local police. We found that much later on, but he was an undercover agent. He went back to his Nazis in Winston-Salem, and the Nazis began to plan their attack on an anti-Klan march and conference that we were to have in Greensboro on November 3rd. Because of the rise of these fascist white supremacist groups, it was believed that this was a labor issue, and the focus of the march and the conference was to be not just fighting racism, but fighting for the rights of workers. In Winston-Salem, Butkovich was there as the Nazis planned to attack this march. They talked about having a grenade. They talked about, he was there in order supposedly to investigate, what do they call those? Automatic machine guns, okay? And they talked about using those against the communists in Greensboro. But then all of a sudden, when he encouraged all the Nazis to go to Greensboro to attack what had become from the WVO, Workers Viewpoint Organization, had become the Communist Workers' Party, he encouraged the Nazis to go when they started getting cold feet. But then he ended his investigation on November 3rd, 1979. Where was the FBI in all of this? Interesting enough, we know that Butkovich had been talking, he's the BATF agent. He had been talking to the FBI regionally. Amazingly enough, and there were other links as well, we'll talk about those later. Amazingly enough, the FBI, 10 days before November 3rd, started an investigation of the Workers Viewpoint Organization, CWP. And we know that they actually carried it out because we have witnesses in Kannapolis who said that an FBI agent knocked on their door and showed pictures of Sandy Smith, who had moved from the Revolution plant down to organize at Cannon Mills. And there's a picture of Sandy and two other men who she swears were Mike Nathan and Jim Waller. Then in Greensboro, the march was called, maybe 4 weeks, a month before November 3rd. It was to be a march followed by a labor anti-racist conference. And after it was called, and the Workers Viewpoint, Nelson Johnson in specific, went to the police to get a parade permit, very soon after that, the police contacted their old FBI, police, Ku Klux Klan informant, whose name is Eddie Dawson, who had been in and out of jail, in and out of scrapes, done a lot of violence. He was part of the Klan Yellow Dog group, which did the violent, really nasty stuff, killing people. But he had never spent a long time in jail. He was contacted by this police officer who they call, and I can't remember his real name, but they called him Rooster Cooper. Now, it's interesting. I'm giving all these details because the details are important to recognize what is coming at you. He just happened to be the head of the Greensboro Police Red Squad. Whenever there was trouble with Bill Sampson or Jim Waller or any of the organizers at the mill, it was Rooster Cooper who was called and sent to the mills on behalf of the corporation, of the textile mill owners, to quiet things down and usually to get rid of the organizers. And so Rooster Cooper calls old Eddie Dawson and he says, well, Eddie, what is this Workers Viewpoint Organization going to do on November 3rd? And he's told to find out what the Klan's plans are to the November 3rd march and conference. Dawson proceeded to go all over the state. He took his job very seriously. He went to there were several Klan groups all over the state of North Carolina at the time, and he went and gave fiery speeches about the need to come to Greensboro on November 3rd to attack the communists. And he was a good speaker. I saw some of the recordings of his speeches. He reported everything that he did to Cooper, who was the Greensboro policeman, and including information about the impending attack with guns. And he even reported that there would be a machine gun coming from the Klan that would be used on November 3rd. That information went all the way to the top of the Greensboro police, to the superintendent, and probably to the mayor. He also, having been an old FBI informant, talked to his old FBI agent contact, so that they were talking to the FBI, and most likely, since they're all in the same building, the FBI and the police were talking to each other too. The police were refusing to grant a permit to Nelson Johnson and the Workers Viewpoint Organization. So Nelson held a press conference in front of the police station, and demanding a police permit for the march, because he knew that otherwise, unless we were protected, there could be danger. Although on the other hand, we were very worried that the police was going to intervene and stop us. And this blocking of the parade permit was part of that blocking. And so at this press conference, he said, "Stay out of our way," meaning do not block the march and the conference. Amazingly, Eddie Dawson was at that press conference. He was there because he had received the parade permit even before Nelson Johnson had. They had given the parade permit to a known Klansman who was, and the parade permit had on it a map of where we were going to be that day, so that they could attack us. And it also said that we were not allowed to be armed to protect ourselves. Nelson Johnson, seeing this odd parade permit, said to the policeman he was talking to, "Hey, do you know anything that I should know?" And the cop said, no, I don't know anything at all. He had just talked to Eddie Dawson, the Klansman, who took the parade permit, and they knew exactly what the Klan was going to be doing with it. And the first thing they did with it the night before the murders, they rode around Greensboro on the parade route and figured out where they were going to attack the march. And it was said as well that they spent time looking at pictures of the Workers Viewpoint Organization, figuring out who they were going to hit. On November 3rd, Dawson was in charge. This is the informant. He oversaw the loading of guns into the backs of cars. He positioned the cars so that the arsenal car was right in front of the shooters, when they stopped, they could just get out, pick out their guns, and shoot people down. But not, and the whole time, that whole morning, he was calling constantly. His agent, his police controller, Rooster Cooper, telling him what was going on, that there were guns there. But Cooper knew, because they had an unmarked car who was watching the Klan get ready across town from where we were preparing our march. And he took pictures of the Klan, the 9 carloads of Klan who took off and went all the way across town. How did they even know where to go in the middle of the Black community in Greensboro? Surely a Klansman doesn't know, and he didn't. The reason he did know was because he had, Eddie Dawson had that parade permit, and he was following the map on the parade permit. They drove into all 9 carloads, plus the unmarked police car drove into the center of the marchers who were just doing what we all do when we're getting ready for a march. Putting up signs, singing, chanting, there were little kids running around. They drove up, they yelled obscenities, racist obscenities. Somebody from the front of the car caravan pulled out a pistol and shot it into the air, and as soon as that happened, they piled out and went backwards and chased the marchers to the back of the car caravan. And there in the back of the car caravan, in what seemed to be a pretty military operation, were the men with the long guns, the rifles, the shotguns, who just shot people down. Then they drove away. We had a parade permit. The police had said that they would be there at 10 o'clock in the morning, but there were no police anywhere. The only police there was Rooster Cooper and his photographer, who took pictures of it all. Never tried to stop it, never called for backup. The protectors had been sent to, the police protection had been sent to early lunch, even as they knew the Klan was crossing town. The Klan got away. One van load was stopped because they stopped to pick up one of their shooters who himself had been shot by one of their own men, but all the rest of them got away. Instead, the police, who finally made it to the corner of Carver and Everett Street, which is where the travesty occurred, arrested 3 demonstrators, including Nelson Johnson, who had been stabbed, whose arm was bleeding, and they beat him, and they took the demonstrators away. How about if we go ahead and show the video? Is that okay?
Yeah. Yep, let me just click on it, and well, I actually already have it up on my screen, so let me just share my screen here. Let's see, just give me 1 second here. Let's see. All right, can everyone see?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna hit play now.
It was right about there that I was bent over Jim Waller, who was shot in the back. I took his glasses off, and I heard the air come out of him and knew that he was dead. My name is Reverend Nelson Johnson. I survived an attack by the Klan and Nazis in November of 1979. in which 5 people were killed, 10 were wounded, and this neighborhood was terrorized. Approximately where I'm standing, maybe a little bit behind me, people were gathering and they were singing and they were chanting. A lot of positive energy out here. About 20 minutes after 11, the Klan caravan, a line of cars came down and turned in this direction. When the 8th car in a 9-car caravan stopped and the back of the trunk came up and people got out of the 9th car, came up to the 8th car, retrieved long weapons, looked like shotguns, and started to fire in the direction of the crowd. At that time, I was attacked by a Nazi with a butcher knife, and actually it was right in here, right about here, that we engaged each other, and he cut me through my arm when I was trying to block him. And then I heard the shots. In a few seconds it stopped, and the cars rushed away. Michael was shot in the face right about here. Cesar was shot right about here. Jim Waller was shot closer back to this direction. Sandy Smith was trying to get the children behind a community center. When she came back around to get some more children, that's when she was hit. The stump of the tree is the only thing out here that provides a little bit of a land marker for where things happen, because the bodies were on this side, and I really didn't know this tree had been cut down until I came out here today. But cutting of this tree is like unpiling the stones that the priests piled up when they crossed over the river Jordan, so that when your children's children ask, what happened here? That tree would be a mechanism of memory so that we could tell the story. And unless we tell stories about the truth of our journey, then I'm afraid that we are locked into the worst of our yesterdays and therefore block the possibility of a bright tomorrow.
I want to just say a little bit more. What we faced that day had happened before. It was, in the big picture, this was a death squad, structured like those that we were to see more and more of in the 80s and some of the 90s in Central America, killing tens of thousands of people. The illegal violence carried out by the racist paramilitary was fully supported by the police and other sections of officialdom, mainly the feds in this particular case. We were targeted, our folks were targeted as political activists, doing good work, doing effective work, and agents of those police in differing relationship to officialdom and to the Ku Klux Klan and the Nazis, helped to do that targeting and facilitated the coming together of all of these racist groups, facilitated their finding the place with police help. And then at the time when the police were supposed to protect the victims, the police walked away. This has happened many times in history. And we saw it in Central America and in very recent history. The most hidden part still is the role of industry, and we can only guess at that. We cannot help but imagine that Cone Mills was involved in this. I mean, Greensboro is a small town. The heads and managers of corporations hang out with the mayor and the cops and the FBI, and they play golf and they have drinks, and they also call each other on the telephone. We ultimately could prove police complicity, and we proved to most open minds FBI and ATF complicity, although they never had to pay for what they did. But we really wish that we could have shown the corporations, shown the truth about the corporations whose interest it was to kill these people. I'm not going to go into the trials. There were 3, except to say if you're going to have a setup, you got to have a cover-up. We had a death squad. The police and FBI and ATF certainly did not want to be exposed for their role, or the corporations. And so there was collusion all the way through the, quotes, criminal justice system. 2 all-white juries let those Klansmen walk and did everything. The prosecutors in both trials, the feds were better than the local Greensboro district attorney, but they did everything that they could to continue to obscure the role of the police and the federal officials. What are our lessons as organizers? First of all, we have to be on the street. The people who were killed were unafraid, absolutely uncorruptible, and unstoppable, which is why ultimately they were killed, I believe, because there was probably going to be no other way to get rid of them. And I think that sometimes happened. And that does not say that we should not be just exactly like them. Instead, it means we have to build a mass movement, because the more people in the streets, the more protected we are. We cannot rely on the police. We have to do everything that we can to make them accountable for their racism, their classism, their violence. We must do that, but we can never assume that we're going to be protected. We need to know the white supremacists are brutal and violent, and they are protected by police officialdom and by higher ups, as we saw with Ken Cuccinelli this week telling the Department of Homeland Security not to report on white supremacists as domestic terrorists, but instead to report on Antifa. Yeah, okay, that's pretty high up. We need to know that relationship between officialdom and the paramilitary, the racist, white supremacist paramilitary, is multifaceted. And there's support and understanding and communication going all kinds of directions. And we should not be ourselves simplistic about that, but we should know that it's there and protect ourselves from it in every way we possibly can. We learned that civil rights and civil liberties on the books do not always apply in the courts or in the streets. And we also learned that we must honor and love each other, because this is the fight of our lives. Our family, we in Greensboro learned, are the people that we trust our lives to, our comrades and friends who believe and fight for the justice that we all believe in. And we have to honor that day in and day out. and cherish and value our friends in the struggle and hold them tight. Questions? I'm sorry that probably took too long, but I really wanted to get into the weeds because I think that the folks need to know that this is repression is complicated.
No, really, thank you so much for speaking as long as you can and have had. So if anyone wants to ask questions, just to reiterate etiquette, if you have a question, just reply stack in the chat, and I'll put you on a list for that, and I'll call on you to speak next. So if anyone has questions, just type in stack in the main chat.
I would really love my friends to criticize or add to or whatever, because they know this and lived through this history too.
So I did have a question. Let me just pull up my list. In general, what security concerns did you all have prior to the march and rally? And if you had any measures that you put in place beforehand for security?
We had people. First of all, when you're doing security, you try to figure out what's going to come your way, what is going to be the threat, and it was dissemination of the folks who were organizing that the most likely threat was going to come from the police. They had been harassing us, pulling down signs, not giving us the parade permit, all the stuff. And we figured that they were just going to come in and bust us up, maybe bust heads. We were worried about agent provocateurs along the route, or perhaps snipers, either one. What happened to us, I'll tell you, was totally unexpected. And so now, since it's happened, it should not be totally unexpected in the future. The Greensboro police disarmed us. And we went along with that and regret that now. They said that we could not have sticks greater than 2 by 2 inches for our posters. No guns, even though North Carolina, everybody has a gun. And they knew the Klan as they crossed town had guns and were coming to our march, and yet they didn't stop them. So, what was that all about? We know what that was all about. That's a spurious question. So there were most people were ready to do fistfights. People who had that capability. But there were kids there. So obviously we didn't expect much. Nelson and Joyce Johnson's 2 little girls were there. Alex was there, Signy's son. My daughter was only 6 months old, so somebody was taking care of her, but I probably would have brought her if she was older. It was not expected, anything like this. They successfully disarmed us. There are a couple people who did have pistols that were designated by the march leaders to deal with anybody who was agent provocateur. But that obviously was not going to be sufficient against long barrel rifles and buckshot. It looks like we got a couple stacks.
All right, Hugo's up next. And if anyone has a question, please reply stack in the stack and you'll be added to the list.
I'm very happy. I love discussing this. So please don't hold back.
Yeah, so I guess my question is just, I don't know, like, I mean, like, for example, today, in like today, like a lot of these like Nazis and like white supremacists, right, like make like heavy use of like social media and like Facebook groups and stuff like that to like find each other in. And, you know, I'm sure, you know, I guess like in, you know, in towns like Greensboro and stuff like that, I'm sure you don't have to search very hard to find other kind of white supremacists like yourself, but I don't know, like, I don't know if you are aware of I guess just like how, I guess like their type of organization tended to be, or how they, you know, found each other, got in communication with one another. How did that kind of go down back then?
There were only two Klansmen there from Greensboro. The rest of them came from all over the state, and they had been knowing each other. There was a social network based on barbecues and hunting and violence that had existed for decades. And so they didn't need social media. And yeah, it is different now, but they had to, I think it's important to know they still had to look far and wide for enough of the murderers to come to Greensboro.
Thank you.
Okay, we got Ben and then Sebastian, then Benny in the chat. So Ben, go ahead.
It feels slightly unfair, but I sort of had a twofer.
That's okay.
I just wanted to know, like, what, if anything, gives you hope within the leftist movement of today? And also, like, as we're dealing with things like the recent murders in was it Portland, I believe, like, it's been a thing in North Carolina where they enforce only open carry laws against leftists and allow right-wingers to like carry however they will. But so along with my initial question, my secondary would be like, do you think it's worth it to try to form security coalitions or things like that in lieu of the police declaring that illegal?
I think that, yeah, you at least have to have discussions. And you want to prevent two things. One is you want to prevent, you want to prevent violence by the white supremacists, definitely. But you also want to keep from getting arrested and violence by the police. So it's a tricky thing. And you're right. Progressives carrying a gun this is a bad word to use. No, they're not asking for trouble, but the police are going to go after them. So you have to discuss this very carefully, and every situation is different. Many people would say that everything should be nonviolent, and I wish that were true. I really would love everything to be nonviolent. I hate violence myself and did from before November 3rd. But Greensboro asks that question. When they're coming at you with guns, what do you do? And I think that the answer is you do your best to protect the people from both white supremacists, the paramilitary, and from officialdom, from the police. And the answer is going to be different every time. I'm sorry, I don't mean to slide away from that, but that's, yeah, Signe, please, yeah. Please, others make comments on this, because I'm not the expert.
I'm not an expert either, but I would like to get in a comment because I think that I am nonviolent. I think that people have a right to defend themselves, and that if you shoot back at somebody who's trying to kill you, you are not a murderer. Okay, if that's self-defense. Self-defense is what we tried to do on November 3rd, 79. We were miserable failures. In fact, one of the security people, Jim and I owned a pistol, and we gave it to a woman who was there, and she was a pacifist. She was a Quaker. She was a daughter of the American Revolution, or her ancestors had been, and she had never seen a gun or held a gun in her life, you know. So she was carrying a gun, and she was part of our security. And Bill Sampson had a gun that didn't work. It misfired every time. He tried to shoot, but the gun didn't work. That's the kind of preparation we had. We didn't typically go to gun shows and clean our pistols. We typically were talking to workers, educating, being educated, organizing, taking a stand, filing grievances. That was our typical activity. Didn't have much to do with guns. But I think, you know, I've thought about this a lot.
Yeah.
And to me, I keep getting back to it's what you do before you have a situation that is obviously going to erupt in violence. I mean, there are situations, once it gets past a certain point, it may not be possible. There's nothing you can do anymore. So the whole thing is, how do you build a movement and how do you unite people in all of those stages in which we get together, we make our demands, they are reasonable, we're compassionate people, we're fighting for a democratic society, egalitarian, we know what we're fighting for, we have a purpose, and we're united. So how do you unite all those people, unite all those organizations, and have such massive numbers that you will prevail before you get to the stage where everybody's got a gun and they're shooting at one another or dropping bombs on one another? To me, it's all in those intermediary stages before you get to the point where it's too late now, you know? So I think, I mean, I do see hope in that because I think DSA is one. There are other organizations that are not organizing people on the basis of violence and hatred and racism, but quite the opposite. And one I'll mention is the Poor People's Campaign, for a national call for moral renewal, moral revival. And another is the movement for People's Party. And there are more. The Sunrise Movements, there's the Black Liberation, the Black Lives Matter, the BLM used to be the Black Liberation Movement in our day. Now it's Black Lives Matter. Really, it's the same thing, right? So if we keep uniting and if we keep getting rid of the othering of people, you know, that I can't talk to you because you're this or you're we got to be with one another, united and fighting for a purpose and compassionate and loving toward one another. I think, Marty, I thank you. You just said beautifully, she gave you all the background of, and it may sound incredible, but does anybody here think that what she said sounded fantastic? It couldn't have happened that way? Or have you seen enough that you know, yeah, that's the way it happened?
Hope. You guys give me hope. And give Signe and Flores and Liz and who else do we have here? And Alex and Cesar hope. And Elliot. Really, the organizing that's going on these days with the courage and the bravery of people in Kenosha and Minneapolis and Portland that gives hope. We all know we're up a creek and our only paddle is the movement. Mm-hmm. And that's being formed, and we all just have to dig in and do it. But you beautiful people, give us hope.
Right.
All right, thank you, Marty and Signe. So next for question is Sebastian. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for the all the information. You mentioned that as part of the trials, there was or I don't know if there was an attempt, but I guess could you describe, you mentioned that you wanted the corporate leaders and their involvement to be, exposed, and that unfortunately didn't happen. And so I guess the question is, what are the reasons, in your opinion, that didn't happen, and what would, in hindsight, be a good strategy for exposing it? Because I would not be surprised if a very similar situation is currently what's happening right now. We saw it with the Tea Party being very astroturfed, and now with, all these white supremacists and, QAnon, conspiracy theory, all these things, that takes resources, and I would not be surprised if they are involved. And so I don't know if you could speak to that part. Thanks.
Do others want to speak to this? I can say very briefly, the reason we couldn't is that corporate leaders don't have to write things down. And police, FBI, and ATF do. Okay, so when we subpoenaed documents, many times they were forced to give them up. And so that we could find out that superintendent at the Greensboro Police knew that Eddie Dawson was leading a group of Klansmen and Nazis on November 3rd. He knew that 2 days in advance. Nobody writes down when they have a gin and tonic with the head of Cone Mills at the country club. And that we learned that it was those kind of contexts that really, and there are probably many other more formal things, but for something as dangerous for the corporate class as this was, open murder in front of TV cameras, they're going to do their best to keep it off paper. And back then there weren't many computers. How do we do it? We found out about the Tea Party and the Kochs through wonderful investigative journalism. I hope y'all have read Dark Money. I think that was it. And investigative reporters and the media is really important, was important to us, and I think is important to all of us. That's what I'd say.
I think if you can't see it, it's only because it's like the air, it's all around you, or a fish doesn't really see the water. The media, the whole thing of failures to have justice for November 3rd, it's multi-institutional. The newspapers printed biased stories, printed lies. They were definitely one-sided. They totally framed the thing in a way that distracted you from what the real issues were. So the media and the courts, the courts, the first two trials particularly, but even the third trial, which was a horse trading thing toward the end, which, we got a little bit of justice for the death of one person and not for the other four, but nothing adequate. It's, you do see it today. It's you see it in just what's happening with Trump and Woodward, that Trump is actually on camera saying that, yeah, he knew the seriousness of the pandemic, right? But did the media talk? Has the media been telling you the story all along? You have a complicit media, a complicit judicial department, and this has been taken to such an extreme today. We even wouldn't have imagined it 40 years ago. We couldn't possibly imagine it would get to this point. It's the oligarchy is out there and fascism is around the corner, but I still think we can defeat it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you guys so much for that input. All right, next for questions is Benny.
Hey, can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I have two questions, if that's okay. First one is, did the Communist Worker Party plan any other marches or demonstrations after the massacre? And if so, how did security philosophy and tactics change? And the second question is, it's my understanding that the CWP stopped being communists a few months after the massacre. And I wanted to know what happened there and if there was any relation between the massacre and the ideological shift. Thank you.
Those are very good questions. We had a million marches. I mean, we approached, it was something I was going to get into, but trying to throw off the cover up and get a modicum of justice, we approached it in the same way that we had approached the communities in the mills. And so, because the courts and the cops weren't on our side, and most of the politicians as well, so we were in the streets. We were much more involved in coalition afterwards. I think that we learned that we were very exposed to be a communist in North Carolina in 1979. And I mean, you would have people saying that it was perfectly right to murder us. Talk about exposure. So we really needed to work with people who were themselves less exposed than we were, but still agreed with the need for justice. So we were in, right
Marty,
on February.
Marty, I just wanted to say, please mention 11/11 and then February.
Yes. Okay. You want to talk about it, Flores?
Just to say that a week after the murders happened, we were in the streets again to bury our dead, and had a really massive funeral march in the streets of Greensboro, to which the city responded by calling out the National Guard. And with
the 82nd Airborne.
Yeah, with bayonets fixed and guns pointed at the marchers, so that the people from around the country just came we were burying our dead. The community was with us. There was a lot, everyone saw the video, saw the news stories. They saw people get shot down on the streets. Even I thought we would have justice in the courts. And the community was with us. We had been organizing in these neighborhoods and in these factories, and people knew us. It was tough for that community to stand up to the press and the media and the red baiting that followed, but we were still very much a part of that community, and continued to do that, because so when Sebastian asked the question about the corporations, they were not the obvious target. The Klan and the police were clear. They're the mouthpieces for the corporations. They do the dirty work. And so they were the immediate adversary for us, but the community, so that was we used that opportunity to continue to educate the community about whose side they needed to be on, and about the predictability of the attacks that can come your way when you are trying to organize and trying to make community change. So we were demonstrating consistently. And then Marty, I think you can talk about the coalition and all of the coalitions we had to work with, and not had to work with, but built. And the February 2nd, which was a really successful demonstration of that coalition, the February 2nd march in Greensboro the following year.
Yeah, that was just 3 months later. Thank you, Flores. Yeah, we had 10,000 people come to Greensboro, which was amazing for the march against the march about the Greensboro Massacre. I think that one of the security, it's once again, we did, as I talked about earlier, we figured out how it was least dangerous for the people who came. What did we expect? I walked like Flores did for 2 miles with a bayonet pointing right here. That was dangerous, but there was also further danger from the Klan. Were we going to get thrown in jail? Were we going to be attacked when sun went down in the cemetery? We chose not to take the buses going back to the city offered by the police, because we said that's a trap, and we marched all the way through town in the dark singing. And you never can know for sure where the biggest danger is going to be, but you do your best to have as many allies as possible who truly agree with you, and build your movement for justice, just like you build your movement for a union. Did you get your questions answered?
I think so. Yeah, thank you so much. I think that was the coalition the answer to why the CWP had an ideological shift?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I think that what happened, and it wasn't weeks afterwards. No, it was a week before that WVO became CWP, and it was a couple years later that CWP became
New Democratic Movement.
New Democratic Movement, and that was 4 years later. I think it was always in the context of the Greensboro Massacre, and knowing just how vicious the attacks could be against communism, but also on our part, wanting to say our truth, that we did not believe that capitalism had any answers. Mm-hmm. And the alternative in our world at that time, the Soviet Union still stood, China, we were Maoists, was more of a progressive force in the world. We wanted to speak our truth. And so it's difficult. At the same time, many of us were thinking it's just really hard to be a communist and organize in the United States. And many of us have thought a whole lot about the issue of violence and in political transformation too. And so, you know, it still is a wonderful bunch of people who really thought hard and devoted their hearts and lives to the struggle for social justice. And so no big decisions like that were made easily.
I wanted to add, Benny, I wanted to address what you used the phrase an ideological shift a couple of times. And I don't think that's not exactly what it was. There were 3 different names to an organization that was basically headed the same way and with the same purpose and values. And it was the Workers Viewpoint Organization, then the Communist Workers' Party, and then the New Democratic Movement. The shift, I don't think it was ideological, from WV, Workers Viewpoint, to Communist Workers' Party, was a more ambitious scenario about the role that the Communist Workers' Party would play in the entire political scene of the United States. It would be a political party contending with other political parties. So that was a step up in goal and ambition. And the New Democratic Movement was more, we had a lot of success with United Front, particularly in the trade union work. in 1978 and 79, we had the Trade Union Educational League, TUEL, that was composed of many different unions in several states. And we were trying to unite the union movement, and we did not have a requirement that you profess communism to be part of this. It was for workers' rights, for workers' power. And if you believed in that, you know, we all worked together. And I think that the new democratic movement was that kind of a shift toward, okay, let's be more expansive. Let us welcome people who are fighting for the same things we're fighting for, and not require that, you know, that they have a communist card, you know, on their person or anything like that. It is, but like Marty said, it's a question of what you believe, what you're fighting for, and it took there were different emphasis at different times, but we never got to a shift, an ideological shift, where we would say, oh, communism is terrible. Actually, now I wouldn't use that to describe myself as the very first word. But I really respect communism. I'm open to it. But it's the same thing like the word democracy, in a sense that you have to look at every nation and every group of people and see how do they interpret it? What are they actually doing? So a label can be useful, but a label does not give you all the answers, because you can call yourself a Christian and you could be the worst, you know, hater, racist, evildoer in the world, you know, or you could call yourself a communist and, you know, really be violent. But the general thing, it's what people do that counts. But the label we had really worked against us, but we still said it because we believed that communism was the antidote. I believed anyway, that capitalism, the only thing that could vanquish capitalism would be communism. It was like the opposite thing. That's what I want. Everything opposite capitalism is what I want. So it's very, you know, let's not get hung up in the words or in the ideology. It's like everything that's decisive is what people do. And if we do it together, if we're united, that will be decisive.
Thank you so much. That clarified a lot, and I really appreciate that answer. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. I think Liz had her hand up, like to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the funeral march and the march after the Tutu, the huge mass march. And I completely agree with what Marty and Signe and Flores have been saying about, you know, a mass movement, and the work is what's important. But it's also important to note that the state did indeed disarm us at those events. We were not allowed to bring any arms in. If we wanted to, we had to sneak them in, which was no real arming ourselves at all. So I just wanted to make that comment about the state being very clear that we were not to be armed.
Thank you, all of you, for answering those questions. It's been really clarifying for everyone here. All right, so next for asking questions is Doug, so you can go ahead.
Hi, y'all. I have two questions as well. They should be pretty short, sweet, and to the point, but they're less about, I guess they're more about y'all's viewpoints. One is, how do you combat such hate and apathy for so long without becoming bitter or vengeful? And number two is, how would you suggest conducting community building / mutual aid in the time of social distancing and COVID-19?
I'll take a stab. We all have our moments. We are not saints. But I think that we had each other in an organization that of people who really cared about us, and we cared back. And that helped a lot. And we also had, all of us shared a real belief that human beings can have a just world. It's not a religious belief. It's a belief based on what's gone before and what we hope, what exists now. That was the first one, but certainly there are many times mopping my floor where I just wanted to kill a Nazi, but I didn't. Okay. What was the second question?
I am not muted anymore. It was, how do you suggest conducting community building and mutual aid in the time of social distancing and COVID-19?
We are not the experts in that, I gotta say. I mean, we do it, we're much worse at it than you are. And I wish you would answer to us. I mean, we do all the Zoom and writing and, you know, all that stuff that you do, but you're probably better at it than we are. And we also are older and more susceptible to the virus. And so it's much more dangerous for us to not socially distance. And so those are our particularities. But we would love to hear from you about what you do.
I'd just like to mention Fed Up in Durham, if you've heard about what's going on there. That's the Poor People's Campaign and Raise Up. They're actually, and Carolina Jews for Justice are actually doing an amazing job getting 800 boxes of food out to people every 2 weeks. So they're working with farmers, but they're also the younger people, not me, but the younger people are going door to door, talking to people. It's not charity. It's not about handing over food. It's about talking to people, educating people, asking the questions, why do you not have food in the richest country in the world right now? And they're having those conversations, recruiting people, and then also a bunch of us are out there every 2 weeks, never having any contact with anybody and delivering food. So that's an example. I'm sure there's a lot of others.
All right, thank you for answering those questions, Liz and Martha and Marty. So next on the list for asking questions is Henry. So go on, Henry.
Hello. I thought of this question a bit ago when someone mentioned it was about when they finally did find later some amount of justice in for the one demonstrator that was killed. I was wondering if there may have been bias in that the only person they seemed to find any justice for wasn't actually associated or a member of the CWP.
Yeah, I think I can answer that. That was very, very hard for us. Mike was the one who Mike's family were, and my daughter and I were the ones that received that. And I think there were several things. Mike was not a member of CWP. And as I said, anti-communism, particularly at that time, was just horrendous. Secondly, he was the father of an infant at the time that he was murdered. And so I think that appealed to the jury. And yeah, but I think that the anti-communism was really strong.
All right, thank you for answering that, and thank you for asking, Henry. Next is Brian. Go ahead.
Hey, y'all. So if you had to do it all over again, what would you change and what wouldn't you change?
I would still be out there protesting the Klan. That's my personal view. We used a lot of really militant language it became a cover. It didn't cause the murders, but it was a cover that they could say that words caused bullets. And so I'd be more wary of that. I would also, when I protested the Klan, I would be very clear in linking white supremacists to official policedom, and point the finger at the collusion between the two. I would fight to have it be a broader thing than it was. I think that we were, because of the communist label, relatively isolated. And so I would fight to have other people fighting with us, protesting with us. I mean, we were doing great work, and there are a lot of people, a lot of great organizing going on. But I think that we could have been broader than we were. And anytime, the bigger the movement, the more you're protected. Anybody else? Flores?
I think it's one of the things that we routinely practiced was we tried to size up the current situation, and at that time I think we were doing great work, and the work that we were doing fit the times that we were in. The times that we're in now is extremely different. The battle is almost still the same. It's escalated to new levels, but you have technology available that was not available then. The forces of the political situation is more blatant. It is extremely more blatant than I have ever seen it, and they're not pulling any punches. They're not holding back. They're openly and nakedly going after the things that are important. That are important to them, and the lines are drawn. So part of the size up of the political situation. So our size up of what was happening then, I think, was on point. Our size up of how safe we were going to be at that march was not on point. But politically, for the organizing work we were doing, it was appropriate. The political situation right now is unlike anything we've seen before. I personally have never seen so many Black and white people standing up for racial justice. The numbers across the country is unprecedented, and the experience of African Americans and the vulnerability that they feel at the hands of the police. People are not just saying, "Oh, that's too bad," and going back to their regular lives. They're sticking with the issue. And so this political situation is ripe for something, everybody can maybe put a label on what they think it is. And so you've got to size up your political situation. And that includes looking at what's happening across the entire country domestically and what's happening internationally.
Did Liz or anyone else want to comment on this question?
Yeah, I'd like to just add to that is I have a lot of hope, going back to hope, because young people are not buying the anti-communism as much as they did 40, 45 years ago. That young people don't seem as afraid. But the other thing in terms of a mass movement that I think about is that my mind just went blank, is that we have to, my mind went blank. Sorry. I had a really good point. Oh, I know. That we, in terms of a mass movement, I think it's a really big question, and people really need to study and think about how do you really maintain your revolutionary fervor at the same time as building a mass movement. And I think that's one of the more important questions, because there's no easy answers to that.
I just want to reinforce what Flora said about doing the political size up. That is really important. And what Liz is saying here about the mass movement, I think back 40, 45 years ago, it wasn't anything like it is today. I mean, we just would have been dying for the kind of mass movement then that we are seeing today. It is really hopeful and encouraging to see the numbers of people, the amount of the way that people are having epiphanies about white people having epiphanies about racism, and for the first time just understanding it, just I put myself in somebody else's place, and I understand this thing as best I can, and the compassion and the values. There is so much. To me, it's a spiritual thing. Not only the size of the mass movement, but I see values in people, the transformation within people that is very spiritual. And people are not going to back down. I mean, that gives me the most hope of anything. I think Marty made that point earlier too. The people in the streets, we had nothing like that 40 years ago, nothing. We really were relatively isolated, although we did have the support of many people in the community. The people who were a little bit more awake and understood supported us, and very often at the risk to themselves or their position in society, their job, and so forth. But today is like nothing else, and as long as we need to build a united front where we're not just looking about how we differ from one another, but what brings us closer together, and what we can do together, what we believe in together, the basic human things that most people share, which is to want to be nice to people. Unfortunately, what we have as a leader right now in the country is exactly the opposite of where we're going and where we want. It's actually, it sums up everything ugly about our past. So we're ready for a jump and a leap into a transformational new scenario. And this mass movement is terrific. We've never had anything like it before. It's wonderful.
Martha, you had something to say?
I put in there we also pulled together in Greensboro the country's first truth and community reconciliation. And that was an interesting experience too. Gets into many, many, many more questions about how do you deal with a horrible, violent past. And it's something that as we face down our racist past, we need to be asking ourselves questions about. This is the final report. There's a URL. There it is. It just came up again. Thank you. There's a URL that you can reach it at. And it also was not the complete truth, but it was a major step forward. And it also showed communities the way that they can deal with the horrors of the past.
All right, thank you everyone for answering those questions. I have another question of person in the stack. It is Quentin. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Yes. So my question is this: I've noticed that it's not just our generation, but the generations that are younger than us that are starting to question, and they're starting to ask, what can they do, in the movement themselves. And you don't want to put them out there, in harm's way and everything, because they are underage, but at the same time they do want to help. So what advice can you give, to someone of a younger generation?
I guess I'll start with that. I would say, so many young people are faced with injustice at an age where they should not have to face it. And so I would say, get the help of your elders if you can, but deal with the things that are hurting you so that you understand what it means to be empowered. And you will learn tremendously through that. And I agree, we are responsible for our young people. And so we need to take particular care that we protect them in this age. But that's what I would do is give them backup to take on the issues that really affect them. Because if they run with those, that experience will stick with them for the rest of their lives and will shape their outlook on how they can get what they need to survive and how they can work with their community.
All right, thank you for answering that question. I'm next in the stack, so I have two questions. The first one is, was there any sort of international cooperation that the organization was able to accomplish? And if so, what kind of nature was that? And I'll ask the second one after you answer this one.
Is it okay if I answer, folks? Immediately after the murders, we got a petition from Denmark with 200 names on it, people who were horrified and wanted to see justice in the Greensboro Massacre. We had support coming in from all around the world, and actually Nelson Johnson presented our case to the United Nations Anti-Racism Conference in Geneva in, I think it was 1983. And we met delegations from all around the world. Ultimately, any success we had was based on what we did in North Carolina and the United States, but it felt real good to know that people around the world understood what we were facing, and many times better than we understood it, because they were, in other countries things can be much, much worse. So we never got any official government support. I mean, we talked to the delegation at the UN from Cuba. We tried to talk to the Chinese. They weren't very interested. And this was before, we also talked to the Soviets. But, we were just, we were labor organizers. We did not have that kind of pull, but we did our best to try to get some attention internationally.
Yeah. Also, our organization, the WVO and the Communist Workers Party, NDM, had international aspects. The WVO, there was a huge Chinese and Chinese American contingent, particularly in New York and on the West Coast. We would have meetings, and they would sometimes be conducted with 3 languages. We definitely emphasized, well, it's not just multiracial, it was multinational. And that was right here. It was, CWP was much more than just a Greensboro chapter. There were chapters around the country. It wasn't a really huge organization, but there were a number of chapters, the West Coast, the middle of the country, the Midwest, the East Coast, North, South. So internationalism was part of the spirit, it was part of our DNA and who we were. And like Marty said, we did have some measure of international support, in some cases with more awareness. I remember there were some articles in Paris newspapers, and there were film crews that were over here. So sometimes people in other countries knew the nature of what we were fighting for, because it was, maybe they could look back at World War II and the Nazis and the importance of united fronts and all of that. And so they were there to support us.
Yeah, that's right. I'd forgotten that. We went to Paris and met with an anti-fascist organization in Paris, but that was an NGO. But they understood what we were up against.
Okay, and just my second question, and it's past 9, so I guess we'll wrap it up after this. Second question is just simply, so we've talked about optimism in regards to things happening in the United States, but what about touching on the international question, how things are abroad? Because we know, like in Chile, there have been, like, and Haiti, Honduras, Colombia recently, just last night, and elsewhere in the world. What is your take on how that is all happening in a global context and what that could mean?
I think that people are sick to death of corporate capitalism all over the world, and each of those countries is reacting for different reasons because of the specific character of their economy and politics. Like in Chile, it was the straw that broke the camel's back was the raising of the was the fare for the subways. In Honduras, and Central America, climate change has caused huge droughts, driven migration to the United States, and then in Honduras, we put in our own puppet there under Hillary Clinton, and and we have a long history of repression and death there. But I think that there's resistance everywhere. And the United States, any sense that anybody ever had that the United States was on the side of international justice is just completely exploded by Trump. I think it's so complicated that would be all that I could probably say. For me as a climate activist, I think that we have to really go forward big time if we have the chance in 2021, big time, and form an international climate alliance that will actually save our skins. Because at present, the future looks very, very, very bleak.
All right, thank you for answering all these questions, and thank you for all of you, Flores, Liz, Signe, and Marty, for showing up tonight and being here and sharing your wisdom and experience with us. It's a great honor, honestly.
Put us on your mailing list, okay?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for listening to all of us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, I'll just, repeat what John Luke said. It was really an awesome experience to hear all about your life experiences and just the decades that you guys have on us, being in this fight. So we really, truly appreciate your time.
It was an absolute joy.
All right. So I guess we'll be finishing off. I guess one thing is because I know that Brian was pushing it. So if anyone didn't get to sign up on this action network that I just placed in the chat, if you could do so, right now or after the event, just so that way we'll have your information on file and stuff like that, so we can share with you, other opportunities or things like that for educational events and such in the future.
And I'd add, if you want on the mailing list, all you have to do is fill that out, and you can opt in and sign in and subscribe to our mail. So.
All right. So yeah, thank you everyone, and have a good evening. And I'll end the call. And it was nice meeting all of you.
Good to see you.
Nice meeting you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.